How's it going, folks? It's Junior here. I play a couple of online games. I've always been interested in the PvP side of computer games. Um, I like the challenge. I like the variety that living organic opponents gives you, and they're able to adapt just as you are. So the learning curve is a lot steeper, and it always progresses. Whereas if you play like a single player game, if you're playing a version of solitaire, essentially, the challenge is always sort of set out in one specific way, and you can find different routes to achieve the goal, but ultimately, once you apprehend some element of how to progress forward, usually they'll see you all the way through. So there isn't that much learning required. At least less so than with live competition. So I find it really interesting when a person that I sometimes play with and has a lot more experience than me, but nevertheless, it's still just another player, came up with the observation that, all right, well, so it's well known in many sort of online competitive communities that having a good connection to whatever server you're playing on usually leverages some kind of advantage. Because if the server is receiving your information first, I mean, it's just like the financial market. If you're closer to the market, you're more liable to have more accurate information, right? And when you send orders or when you make commands, the market reacts faster to you than to other people. So there's a distinct advantage from a financial perspective in the financial markets. And if you transpose that into the gaming world, if you like, what you have is when you're closer to the server, when you have a better connection to the server, it's able to read and respond to your requests and demands faster than it is to anyone else's. And that can mean a real advantage, especially if there are things happening apparently simultaneously. You will in fact have a slight advantage in that it's happening faster for you, and your commands are given priority because they're coming in first, and it can only accommodate for the information it has, not the information that it doesn't have. Even if the information's on the way, if it's not there yet, it can't make changes based on that information. So there was interest then in this discussion that in one specific PvP community, some people were claiming that actually having a bad connection, having a high ping, and a ping is a measurement of the distance. It's the time it takes a signal to get from your location to the server's location and back again. And then that can be used as an inference on the strength of your connection, on how good and how quick the server can respond to your commands in comparison to other people. There was some conjecture over whether or not it was actually beneficial to have bad ping, to have a really high ping number that showed that you were receiving data, the server receiving data a lot later than from other competitors. And the argument was, I believe, that by having bad ping, by having really high ping, the server would make certain accommodations for you. So there was some technology built into it that would somehow actually disadvantage those with better ping, with a better connection, to compensate. And there was no evidence given to how this mechanism would work, or even whether or not it was applicable in principle or in practicality. But nevertheless, I did start hearing these people say that, by having a lot of latency, but by having a much later connection to the server, you were unfairly advantaged. And while I'm not sure what they said is true, I did nevertheless try to think about the psychology of the position they were taking. Now, on some level, I was concerned that, well, maybe they've been drawn into this conclusion because it was the most available solution for a problem they had, which was, maybe they were aware of their better connection than other people. They were aware that they had some sort of obvious advantage, yet they weren't able to succeed against these other competitors. And perhaps this was a more convenient explanation, potentially, than one which might have reflected badly on them, like the other players were better than them, or they were worse, or something like that. And so I began to think, okay, if they really define some sort of advantage out of this position, why don't they try to attain the position for themselves? If they're willing to commit to the belief that this otherwise apparent disadvantage actually had a very crucial and significant real advantage, then if they believed that, why wouldn't they try and attain that advantage for themselves? I mean, in every other area of the game, people would go out of their way to try and get small advantages, even if it compromised the quality of life or the play style of the game or anything really. All that mattered to a lot of people there was winning. They wanted to be the best, and if they had to do more button commands, if they had to do situations that seemed counterintuitive, if they had to do complex maneuvers, all these kinds of things, they were happy to expend that extra energy and put themselves out to obtain those advantages if it correlated with winning. So why would they not then chase this next advantage of, well, all I have to do is increase my latency to my distance to the server. I have to increase the number of connections it takes to get to the server, and then I will also leverage this advantage. And I think that's because at heart they knew that what they were proposing was both illogical and extremely unlikely, and that really there was no advantage there. In principle, it sounded good to say because it let them off the hook in terms of feeling like they were inferior to somebody else. But it would be quite easy to increase your ping, right? You could just go through a couple more connections. You could add like a virtual private network to your connection so that your signal gets relayed off of a few more locations before it reaches the server, and that would easily increase your ping. You could even limit your bandwidth, right? So you could throttle your bandwidth so that you're only sending out a certain amount of information at once, and that way, before the full message is received by the server, it has to wait an additional time, and that would also artificially increase your ping as well. So, again, I was interested in this distance between the things they were saying and the way they were acting. And as I said, it's highly feasible for you to find methods to increase your ping. It's decreasing your ping, decreasing the latency is the hard part. That's where you actually have to spend money. And you have to change technologies to find ways of reducing the latency. So I find it very interesting that the cheaper, more accessible, and easily achievable option, which they claimed leveraged an advantage, was something that they would not pursue, even though they were clearly motivated on competition success. And I found that highly contradictory to the things they were saying. And so the conclusion I have to come to then, or I'm quite liable to come to, is that what they're saying, on some level they understand not to be true, but it is nevertheless something that they want to hear. So they're going to put it into the world and maybe hope to have it repeated back to them or confirmed, or maybe the effect of the words is more important than the meaning of the words. So they want people to not believe that they're inferior to others. So they'll say this thing which obfuscates the truth, even if they know it's not. Even if they know it's not correct, because then if they can convince others of a certain thing, that will be. They believe that will be advantageous to them in another way. And it made me look at a few other things that I probably won't go into detail, but I think it's interesting to see when you hear that certain things are the same in one place or another place. And then individuals come out and say, oh, but this place suffers from a unique situation, and that's why this disadvantage is here. But then you'll see the same disadvantage repeated in so many areas, and you have to begin to wonder, well, is it really because of what's being said, or is there actually an underlying reason that is less flattering, but more accurate? And one with which there is this cognitive dissonance that the mind either doesn't want to or abjectly refuses to accept. And so the excuses are produced. And while in some situations, like the gaming situation, because people don't act on those excuses, they're just convenient. Nothing really happens and there's no real change in the world, so they're almost harmless. But in other situations, a gross submission to that opinion actually does influence change. And And if it's changed based on a lie, or based on avoiding an uncomfortable truth, is there not then the risk that that change will be negative, much more negative than accepting the truth would have been? Thanks so much for listening, guys. See you later.